For decades, these documents remained archived. They weren't secret. They were simply ignored. Because on those pages there were no theories. There were names, dates, and real decisions made by scientists, doctors, and entire governments. Decisions that today would chill us to the bone. What you're about to hear? These are real experiments, approved by official institutions that today would be considered serious crimes. And the most disturbing part is not what they did. It's why they believed it was acceptable. This video is not about science. It's about the limits that disappear when no one is watching. And the final case explains why today ethical laws exist that are never questioned. In 1932, in Alabama, United States, one of the most infamous medical studies in history began. The official goal was simple: to observe how syphilis progressed in the human body. The crucial detail was that it would not be treated. 600 poor African American men were recruited, most with no formal education. 399 were diagnosed with syphilis. They were never told. They did not sign informed consent forms. They didn't know they were part of an experiment. They didn't even know the real name of the disease. They were told they had bad blood. They were promised free medical care, and they were kept under observation for years. Then, for decades. When penicillin became a safe and effective cure, the researchers made a chilling decision: to withhold treatment. They wanted to see the end, the complete degradation of the body, death. The study lasted 40 years. Many died without knowing why. Some infected their partners. Children were born with congenital syphilis as a direct result of the experiment. Everything was state-funded. Everything was approved by doctors. When the scandal broke in 1972, there was nothing left to undo. This study marked a turning point, because it made one thing disturbingly clear: when ethics disappear, science can become monstrous. And what comes next is even worse. During World War II, inside Nazi concentration camps, medical experiments were carried out to solve a military problem. German pilots who fell into icy waters were dying too quickly. The scientific question was this: how long can a human being survive in extreme cold before dying? To answer it, researchers turned to prisoners. Men and women were submerged naked in tanks of frozen water. Others were left outdoors for hours, their bodies exposed to absolute cold. Scientists took notes as body temperatures dropped. They recorded the exact moment when confusion appeared, when speech became incoherent, when the body stopped responding. Many died during the procedure. Others survived only to be used again. When the body collapsed, the next phase began. Rewarming methods. Some were forced into boiling baths. Others received body heat from prisoners forced to hold them until exhaustion. None of this was improvised. Everything was documented. Everything had charts, data, and conclusions. After the war, these results created a massive ethical dilemma. The information was scientifically valuable, but obtained through absolute brutality. Today, these experiments would not only be illegal, they would be considered crimes against humanity. And yet, what comes next did not happen in a concentration camp or during a war. It happened in universities, with volunteers. In the 1950s, during the Cold War, the United States Central Intelligence Agency launched a program surrounded by absolute secrecy. Its name was MKUltra. The goal was not persuasion. That had already been mastered. What they wanted was far more extreme: to break a person's mental structure and test whether it could be rebuilt from scratch. Under this premise, experiments were funded in universities, hospitals, and psychiatric institutions. Thousands of people were used as test subjects without their knowledge. Some were given high doses of LSD, sometimes in controlled environments, and other times in completely everyday situations. Others were subjected to prolonged isolation, sleep deprivation, repeated interrogations after losing the ability to distinguish reality. The effects were devastating. Some subjects developed severe psychosis. Others lost entire portions of their memory. Some never fully recovered. At least one death was directly linked to the program. MKUltra operated for years without clear ethical approval and without real oversight mechanisms. When it was exposed in the 1970s, much of the documentation had already been destroyed. The exact number of victims was never known. The true extent of the damage was never measured. But one thing became clear. The human mind is not a closed system, and in the wrong hands, it can become an experiment with no way out. And what they studied next was even more disturbing, because it showed that the real problem was not the methods, but ordinary people once authority gives them permission. In 1961, a trial in Jerusalem captured global attention. Adolf Eichmann, one of the main logistical architects of the Holocaust, defended himself with a phrase that froze the courtroom.
I was just following orders.
That phrase didn't disappear into the air. It traveled straight into the laboratories. That same year, psychologist Stanley Milgram designed a study at Yale University, not to study criminals, but ordinary people. Participants believed they were taking part in research about learning and memory. They were instructed to administer electric shocks whenever another person answered a question incorrectly. The person receiving the shocks was in another room. They couldn't be seen, only heard. The screams became increasingly desperate. They begged for the experiment to stop. Then, silence. The shocks, of course, were not real. What was real was the tension in those pressing the button. Each time they hesitated, a researcher dressed in a white lab coat gave a simple instruction: please continue. The results were disturbing. Over 60% of participants went all the way to the maximum voltage level simply because an authority figure told them to. People with no violent history, normal people, convinced they might be killing someone. Milgram didn't prove that people are cruel. He proved something far more uncomfortable: how easily we can ignore our own judgment when authority validates the action. And that conclusion was just as dangerous as the experiments before it. Because the final case in this video takes this idea even further, much closer, much more personal. For 6 days, the experiment continued without anyone stopping it. Not because intervention was impossible, but because the situation began to feel real far too quickly. What started as an academic simulation evolved into an oppressive environment capable of altering behavior, emotions, and the sense of identity. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo organized a study at Stanford University with a premise that appeared harmless. 24 students were selected and randomly assigned to 2 roles: guards and prisoners. The setting was simple, but the psychological effect was immediate. Within hours, the guards began exerting control. That control turned into pressure, then humiliation. Finally, abuse. On the other side, the prisoners deteriorated rapidly. Severe anxiety, emotional breakdowns, a gradual loss of personal identity. Some stopped seeing themselves as participants and began behaving as real prison inmates. Zimbardo himself became trapped inside the dynamic he had created, unable to recognize in time that the experiment had crossed a critical boundary. The study was supposed to last 2 weeks. It was terminated on the 6th day after outside intervention from someone who recognized the obvious psychological harm. The consequences did not vanish when the study ended. Many participants carried emotional scars for years. The impact on the scientific community was immediate. Regulations were tightened. Protocols were revised. Ethics stopped being optional and became non-negotiable. This experiment did not close a chapter. It opened one, and it left a question that still unsettles. How many studies were possible only because no one dared to stop them?